Hey, thanks a lot for coming along. So my name's Piers. I'm going to be your host for this session. And I know that I'm the only thing that's standing between you and the bar, so I'm going to try and stick to time. So for those of you who don't know who Xero are, and they're, we are kind of a bit of a well-kept secret in some parts of the world. In other parts of the world, we have had a little bit more success. We were founded in 2006 by an entrepreneur by the name of Rod Drury. And we're a SaaS firm with a main kind of accounting product. So we do online accounting, cloud-based accounting. We've also got some kind of payroll add-ons and some productivity tools that we use for accounting firms. And that's kind of the business space that we play in. We are relatively new to SRE. So I'm kind of one of the representatives of the 48% that Paul mentioned at the start of today's agenda. And hopefully I'm going to be speaking to a large number of people who come from that 48% of attendees outside the top 10 companies. So what I wanted to share today is some of the lessons that we learnt, particularly the ones that we learnt the hard way in our first few years of running our production platform with this kind of SRE concept. Hopefully, I can impart some lessons that will help others avoid the pitfalls that we've fallen into. So SRE at Xero, as I said, we're around about 2 years old. Basically, the impetus for our team forming was a migration away from a traditional data center to one of the larger cloud providers. And when we did that, we split our old operations team into kind of two groups. A lot of them went into what we call product teams, the people that run those products, and they kind of provided some of those kind of DevOps skills to product teams. And the remainder of people were kind of most of the ones that had a performance background like myself, or some development skills, or indeed a whole heap of people that we've hired since then, were pulled into a core SRE team, where we kind of performed a lot of the monitoring, alerting, incident management type functions that the typical firefighter SRE role would perform. So today we're at 3 teams across 3 locations. There's 2 in New Zealand, 2 teams in New Zealand cities, and a team in Denver. And so we've got around 30 SRE engineers. But like most of you, we're hiring, so come find me after. So as I said before, we kind of had pretty good run at things, and we've managed to increase our customer numbers quite substantially. So I joined back in 2011 when we were still in the tens of thousands of paying customers, and things have gone a bit nuts since then. It's been a pretty amazing roller coaster. And so the company that I work in now is not the one that I worked in back then. And I love these kind of scale graphs because you see them in every marketing type of brochure where they talk about how we're the special unicorns. But behind every one of these, you're going to find another set of charts which follow the same pattern. Right? And so here's the number of alerts that we had triggered in our production platform across the time of that migration. And basically a doubling of the alert workload that was coming to our engineers. And inside here, we dug into it and we realized there was a lot of noise that was occurring, or repetitive triggers for things that we now had a distributed infrastructure servicing those requests, and all of them are firing at once. So one of the first tasks we had as an SRE team was to get a handle on this kind of operational burden. What do we do to make this a sane on-call experience, and the sort of thing that we want to encourage our development teams to own? We did that basically by attacking our alerting and simplifying it. As I mentioned before, the formation of SRE coincided with the creation of these kind of autonomous product teams, which had some DevOps ideals embedded into them. And those teams that did it really well and successfully, they managed their own alerting. And that was really great. They kind of, they took that ownership. There were other teams that needed a bit more of a hand. And so in order to do that, we generated more generic alerts. So that they would fire based on the symptoms that we were seeing. So I don't know if any of the room here is aware of that philosophy of alerting paper that came out around about the same time as the Google SRE book, probably as a precursor to it. It was a Rob Elshuk who did that, and it was getting passed around. And it really focused on the idea of identifying symptoms and trying to trigger an alert off that. So we took a handful of those, and some examples we've got up here. CPU credit burn. If your infrastructure is burning CPU credit and is going to be throttled in terms of CPU, that's probably the sort of thing that we want to identify and intervene in early. Similarly, if we have a load balancer with a minimum number of hosts and that number of hosts failed, would trigger alerts that way. And so that kind of took a lot of the possible root cause alerts that we were getting in this kind of flurry, this fire hose of noise, and reduced it down. We also found a really good signal for customer complaint in the rate of hits that we saw to our status page or our error pages. And so in order to kind of leverage that signal, we developed a system called Klaxon, which is a really simple concept. We just have inside our error page or our status page, we have a little JavaScript snippet, which does a callback, and we use some API gateway and some fancy Lambda stuff to kind of work out where all that hit traffic is coming from. Kind of do some IP address reduction, just in case it's a single IP hitting this thing. And based on a threshold that we'd set, we could trigger an alert. And this is really good because it allowed us to see when customers were experiencing a problem, and it acted as a kind of catch-all, right? So that even if we didn't have the symptom covered by some pre-configured alerting elsewhere, this system would tell us that customers are experiencing a problem. So far it's been really successful at kind of being that safety net alert, but we've actually taken it a little bit further, and we've taken the alert firing and used that as a triggering event to update our status page as well. So when we know that this alert is triggered, we change the banner message to say, hey, we're aware of a problem. And that's really allowed us to kind of front foot a lot of the tickets that we would receive in that kind of situation. One of the other things it does is just throws an alert into our production channel. So there's a small audience of 800 odd people that have seen this. So, everyone knows that it's down, not just the customers. So yes, we simplified alerting. The second major thing that we kind of attacked was incident management. And like most startups, the kind of standard way that you start attacking these kind of serious, proverbial has hit the fan type problem is to start a war room. And you would go and get your most experienced or highest value engineers and you'd pull them off of whatever task they were doing, haul them into a war room and say, can you fix this problem? Well, as we grew, we realized that that was not only not a scalable approach, it wasn't providing those high-value engineers with a very rewarding work environment. So we took some time to step back from the process of emergency reaction to document what the process ought to be, kind of streamline that process, and then built some automation support. And the automation support that we built around it is a chatbot goes by the name of Multivac. And my colleague Karthik, he's going to be speaking about this tomorrow just before lunch. So if you're interested in how we do incident management with chatbots at quite a deep level, come along to his talk tomorrow. One of the cool things that Multivac does do is as we close down our incident, it kind of produces a post-mortem document with all the links to the various things that have gone on. And that's been, a really good shortcut and efficiency gain, stopping an engineer having to go and manually collate all of that information. So with those two things, with the simplified alerting and the incident management stuff in place, that really helped improve our levels of service. So we noticed that we were noticing our problems earlier, mean time to detection, and we were fixing stuff more quickly because we had the incident management framework together, so the mean time to repairs improved. But there's still a problem that we hadn't actually realized yet. So here's the number of incidents that we had over time over that 2-year period, and it's the same kind of trend, increasing. And it's pretty frustrating because, again with this trend, we thought we were doing everything well. After every one of these incidents, we're running post-mortem, and we're identifying the contributing cause of that incident. And we're kind of creating these work items, and yet the overall rate is still increasing. So I went looking for why is this occurring? And in order to do that, I took all, several hundred of these incidents, and I went diving down into the detail, looking for what the contributing causes were and collating a list that I decorated the data set with. And to be honest, it was a really, really boring job, kind that all of you should hate. I had to, I couldn't even delegate it. I felt so bad about it. So as I got this data set together, some things started to emerge. The themes that started to emerge were that we're quite often dealing with the same technology problems or the same teams involved or the same deficiencies in detection. And this is information that's really important, really useful information. And in fact, I would argue that this is the main reason that you should do post-mortems, is to identify what these high-level themes are. Because it tells you where our reliability issues are coming from. And yet we weren't capturing it for 2 years. So we've got a stack ranked set of terms. I've anonymized some of the technologies that we use to protect the guilty. But it quite clearly tells you that we had problems with our release process. And more importantly, it kind of tells us how important one thing is to work on against another. I mean, it's a pretty crude way of doing that determination, but it's better than having no evidence whatsoever. So, we can see that our release process in this example is probably 4 times more important to work on than, say, capacity or something halfway down the list. So our post-mortems weren't working as we expected. We weren't seeing these trends frequently, and sometimes it was even worse than that. We were kind of rerunning a whole post-mortem just because we weren't aware that we'd had pretty much identical incident a week before. And that's just because we'd scaled out. It wasn't necessarily the same on-call set of people that were involved in both of those occurrences. And when I looked around the room in one of those post-mortems, perhaps it wasn't surprising when I think about who was participating. Typically we would have the on-call SRE engineer, the on-call person from the product, customer success representative, and that was pretty much going to be it. And as a result of that limited set of participants, the commitments that we were making about the work that we were going to do weren't being communicated back up the chain, and the work that we thought was important wasn't actually being prioritized. Here's just an example of what that gap looked like. This is post-mortem related work over time. The green line is the stuff we've actually managed to remedy, and the red stuff's still on the backlog. So it's roughly 50% attack rate. So what I realized that we were missing were the influencers, the movers and shakers that could make the call on what the balance is between the feature work and the reliability work. And we still needed all of those coalface engineers, but we needed leaders as well. And in our organization, the three groups really were the tech group leads, so like dev managers, heads of engineering, so forth, the product owners, the people who work on the roadmap, and then senior management. And we needed to get them engaged. And so the way that we got them engaged was, we started campaigns of a sort, perhaps a little bit more kind of ad hoc. We'd look for opportunities to have these kind of conversations. Conversations like, what are our expected service levels? What should our operational maturity be with a new technology before we adopt it in production? And you know, there's some other ideas here about what we should be talking about. Our larger projects started having a technical kickoff, and we quite often crashed that party and said, hey, don't forget about us. Don't forget about the operational story of this thing once it's gone live. And so yes, we can see what the content of the conversation was, and I think this is a really good place to start. But more than anything, using the right language to talk to those leaders and influencers really gave us the best bang for buck. Talking about why we should do this work. Using language about developer productivity. Using language around what the customer impact is, or perhaps what the business goals might be. And using that kind of language really allowed us to get our ideas, our point of view across to them. Why is this thing important? One other system that we built, it's called Report Card. It's another conversation starter. For those of you who can't quite see at the back, it's just a series of kind of operational hygiene scores, things like SLO or alert fatigue, like how frequently your on-call engineers are being alerted about things. And it doesn't actually even matter that if the numbers are perfectly correct, it's an opportunity for a conversation. This isn't like a novel idea at all. I've seen this in other SRE conferences and around the place. But you know, again, it serves to start a discussion. So if the me from 2 years ago had been a little bit smarter, here are a couple of things that I wish I had done. Number one, track the incident trends as they happen. Would have saved me a whole heap of time. So as we go through a post-mortem and we identify what the contributing causes were, you know, capture it somehow, build a system that kind of collates it all so you can report on it consistently and regularly. Number two, like involve the right people. Involve people that can influence whether your work gets done or whether it gets parked. And you need to make sure that you have them in the fold because it won't happen without their support. And then number three would be about using the right language. Going to a team and saying this is the right thing to do is often not enough to convince them. If you use arguments that are based on the customer impact or the engineering cost of not doing the work, I find things to be a little bit more straightforward. Wait, so that's what I wanted to share with you, but we have time for questions.